and y'all and help work of the CCT and really how to build a social business. And so we hope that not only you learn how to apply for Spark Tank, but at the same time that this becomes a practical tool for you and your work. I will have a time for question and answer at the end, but as you have questions and things pop up, I do ask that you stick those in the chat. I do have our team here with us that will help me moderate the chat questions, and we'll be happy to answer this as we go on. So at the end of the day, our hope when we do workshops like this, as we're running Spark Tank, is to launch more social enterprises in our Central Valley. To date, we've been able to invest in 67 startup social enterprises, and that number continues to grow. And I imagine most of you here today are also interested in joining that number and some of the opportunities that we offer here at the center. The reality of why we focus on social enterprise is not only because it's innovative, it's new, it's exciting, but at the same time, we realize that Fresno oftentimes is number one at a lot of things, but they're not always the best list. And so part of our reasoning here and part of our push to invest in social enterprises over the last 10 years has been that if we continue to do what we've always done, we're going to end up with more of the same. And so we really do see business as being vital to community well-being and transformation. However, we realize that for people to start a business and tap into the other 90% in the marketplace, if you will, that other than the 10% that traditional startups like nonprofits, foundations, and churches tap into, we want to tap into the other 90% of the marketplace. However, to start a business, it can be very expensive, and startup capital oftentimes does not exist. And that's why we raise capital ourselves to invest it in startup social enterprises. And for us, it would be to reduce risk for you, the entrepreneur, and ultimately increase the equity in the business that you own, have, and are running, and the impact that you can have in your community. And our catchphrase that you often hear us say is, we believe in community members solving community problems through business. So how does this work? You have a little bit of a timeline here in front of you. So right now is February 1st, which is the first of 2 social business plan workshops. This one is in the morning. The next one is in the evening. It is the exact same workshop. So if you really did like the information, you're welcome to come back, but it will be the exact same information we are presenting today. At the end of this too, you'll receive my contact information. You can reach out to me or anyone on our team if you have any questions, and we'd be happy to help and guide you in this process. March 9th, if the deadline to submit this year, there is a Google form that we will be emailing out to y'all at the end of this as well. And there is a template that you will follow in completing. I will say that this process, in my heart, I hope, is not as complicated as others, in the sense that we essentially have a series of questions that should total about 2 to 3 pages of an application written, if you will. And so we try to ask questions that we really care about and want to know about. And we're not going to have you go through this very long process to submit your proposal as to what you're working on here. And then pitch day. Excuse me, I have a typo here, but pitch day is actually March 23rd, and you will receive your acceptance on March 15th. So flip those dates, excuse me. And so essentially when you submit, part of what we're going to ask you to do is hold the afternoon from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. on March 23rd for a pitch day. This year, we will continue to host this via Zoom. And so that virtual pitch will happen. The other thing as part of your proposal is you do have a written section and a video section. And so our judges will have an opportunity to get to know you a little bit better before the submission deadline. And then part of the stipulation of funding for our entrepreneurs when they accept funding from Spark Tank is that they also are scholarshiped into our Social Enterprise Academy, which is a social enterprise accelerator. Those 2 months we hack and work really quickly to get your business up and running. And the goal at the end of this is to move it from beyond startup into operation. And then finally, to kick off to wrap up our calendar, we have an expo that we host here at our Cultural Arts Center at Fresno Pacific University. What I should have done, Jeanette, is stuck a fun picture of what that event looked like last year with all the businesses and the large crowd that was there. And there you'd have an opportunity to showcase your product or services, as well as talk to all the folks that do support the social enterprise ecosystem here in Fresno, including investors, partners, community members, and potential customers. All right, so where are we headed today? So we want to define a couple things here, is why social enterprise and what it is. At the same time, we want to help you understand how to build a social enterprise, and finally, how to apply for Spark Tank. And so without taking too much more time, let's go and get started here. So what is social enterprise? You may be wondering, how do we define this and why should we care? And what can it do? And so when we think about social enterprise, there are big problems in the world, from the streets in our neighborhood to the planet as a whole. Our world has a lot of problems that affect people that we care about. And whether it's your faith tradition calling you to care about this problem, whether you know someone who's facing a big problem in their life, or whether you've gone through your own painful experiences and don't want others to go through that, many of us want to do something about these problems that we see. And we all know that most of these problems can't be fixed by a social media post or awareness or a simple GoFundMe donation or even an afternoon volunteering. And while those things are absolutely needed and not necessarily bad things, most of them don't have a solution that makes a big enough difference or makes a difference that can last. And this is where social enterprise is a unique model of solving these big problems, because it provides the ability to grow big as you need to in order to address the size of your problem, and the ability to make money so that at the end of the day, you can keep going. And so those are big statements, and I do want to dive into what social enterprise is and what it means. And so for us here at our center, we see social enterprise as a business that exists to solve a social or environmental problem. And so the social enterprise, again, is a business. It has to have a revenue stream. It has to make money in some way, shape, or form, not necessarily just relying on grants or donations. And again, the idea and the justification here from the research that we have from the Pew Institute is that from the Great Depression until 2019, charitable contributions in the United States have not budged between 9 to 11%. And that means that nonprofits, churches, foundations, and other charitable trusts are all competing for this ethereal 10% in the marketplace. And so while charity is great and absolutely needed in our community, our push is, could we tap into the other 90% of the marketplace to do good with that money? And, sometimes you may think of big businesses exploiting people, systems, community, all the above. We imagine social enterprise as a new way to do business in our community, and this business would exist to solve social and environmental problems. And so there are two parts here. There is an impact or a mission, if you will, and then there's the business side. And you could say, well, a lot of businesses have a mission statement, so like, what's the difference? And well, something that separates social enterprise is that they exist because of the problem in the world they are trying to solve. And so most of the time, the problem is the inspiration for social enterprises. It's not an afterthought, if you will. And so everything that's built in a social enterprise is geared towards solving and supporting the processes to address the problems that we're working on here and care about. So something to remember for all social entrepreneurs is that the better you are at both impact and business, truly the more impact that you're going to have. And so when we talk about impact in business, they need to both be given energy and focus. So we need to set goals, measure progress, make improvements, because we deeply care about both of these. And so some people might say that these two components can often be butting heads. They don't mix well together. Some would say like oil and water. Others say that it runs into a game of tug of war. Sometimes I think of other words that are, oxymorons, things like jumbo shrimp, right? Like those things aren't quite lining up. And so you don't know whether to focus on business or impact. But in social enterprise, part of what we help our entrepreneurs do is shape their models so that impact and business actually complement each other and the decisions benefit both. And so both social entrepreneurs become also at solving the problems in the world that they care about, but they're also really good at building successful businesses. And so let's get a little bit more specific here, because there are 3 broad categories of how you can go about making an impact. And we'll go through a quick definition of each and then hop into examples to get a real life picture of what it can look like. So the first one is an embedded model. And not to get super ethereal here, but I use these as a guide to help explain what we're looking for and the ideas behind social enterprises. And so I want to use a really simple metaphor, whether it's a product or a service, but let's say you're a farmer and you grow vegetables. And an embedded social enterprise model, the vegetable itself solves the problem, probably by someone eating it. Maybe they're lacking certain nutrients and your vegetables provide nutrients that they need. And here in a bit, I am going to share a specific model in each of these categories. The second one is an integrated model or operations. It's how you run your business. And so using the same farmer metaphor, in the integrated model, what solves the problem is how you grow the vegetables or who you hire to grow and pick the vegetables. Maybe the way you grow your vegetables takes carbon out of the air and puts it back into the ground. Or maybe there are some local young adults who are feeling hopeless and you are now providing them a job they can do. And then finally is our integrated model, where the focus is how you give back with what you have left over. In the farmer example, you take the money left over from selling your vegetables and use those profits to solve problems. Maybe you donate money so that schools can buy books for kids. So really there are 3 basic categories of social enterprises, but I do want to take a look at examples and show what a social enterprise looks like here in our ecosystem in Fresno. So a number of years ago, we worked with Eric and Sheena Leung, and Eric and Sheena Leung had formed what we call community music school here at the university, actually. And part of what they saw in community was that local students had little access to music or after school programs. This was because they were actually the directors of music here at the university, and they saw this big gap between affluent school districts and lower income school districts and how their bands were performing. And it wasn't necessarily a talent gap, but just a performance gap. And so what they realized was that the gap here was that students that were in the higher income school districts had access to private music lessons, where students in less affluent areas did not have access to private music lessons. And so for them, part of what they wanted to do was offer low cost to no cost music lessons to kids, and help them, get to college, help them get scholarships and provide them an opportunity access in this space. And so what their business problem they started to realize was that some of these lower income school districts, often designated as Title I schools, had a need to provide extracurricular programming and support for students. And so school districts actually became their customers, not the students themselves. And so school districts contracted with Community Music School to offer these music lessons rather than the students paying for these. And so this one is our embedded model. And this one, again, is pretty straightforward, if you will. Right, there is another customer and the end user could oftentimes be different than who's buying this product. All right, the second one is Neighborhood Industries, and this was founded by 2 of our friends, APR Murr and Brian File. And Neighborhood Industries, originally Neighborhood Thrift, and now has 4 businesses, 4 social enterprises in the Tower District. But part of their impact problem is that in their neighborhoods, there were a lot of people who didn't have jobs and had multiple barriers to employment, people who just needed a chance in some professional development. And so some of these people were coming out of homelessness, some of them were coming out of rehab, some had been out of job for a number of years. And their business problem was that residents in Tower needed new clothes and other household items, but couldn't afford full prices. And that's where the idea of a thrift store to provide affordable goods for their neighborhood began. And so their business model now hires about 50 to 60 people a year to provide full-time employment and some for them part-time employment to give them an opportunity to lily pad into the workforce again. And so at the same time, part of their goal is also to reduce, reuse, and recycle, if you will. And so all of the clothing that gets donated to them is reused for another life cycle. And that clothing that cannot be used actually became part of their second social enterprise, which is neighborhood recycling. And so they use all the tons of waste that they collect and actually are able to recycle it and sell it off to provide additional employment for the folks in the neighborhood industries pipeline. And that becomes our integrated model, where it's not necessarily, the cup of coffee or the bag of clothes that they're selling that accomplishes the mission, but it's the people that they're hiring in this process to give another opportunity to. And then finally, there's Lana Coffee. And so a church in Fresno spent some time in Thailand, and this was almost 12 years ago, 11 years ago. And they saw that some of the villages needed access to clean water, and also people needed to buy their coffee beans so they could stop growing opium. And so this village in Thailand was actually an opium-focused economy. And what happened here was that because they focused on opium, oftentimes the cartels or the gangs in those areas would come and raid their villages for their crops. And if they didn't have enough, they would haul families away. And so this was a big injustice that this church saw. And so what they did is they originally started with the idea of setting up cacao beans in Thailand in this village and then helping them sell their beans. And then at some point they started to buy their beans, and then they started to roast their beans here in the US. And then they began to start selling those coffee beans and grounds to churches, coffee shops, and restaurants. And then with these profits from selling these coffee beans, then Lana Coffee has been able to buy and create new water wells, providing fresh water for these hill tribes in Thailand. And so in this model, they saw this big problem where oftentimes families had to walk a couple of miles to get access to clean water. However, when they would come back to their villages, this water sometimes was contaminated and made their villages sick. And so they found a creative way through selling coffee beans and their business to solve this problem, if you will. And so now in 2023, they have provided over 14 million gallons of clean water, and will continue to do so over the next 20 years because of the clean water wells that they've created. And you'll also find their coffee in retailers like Costco and Vons here in the Valley. And this is our external model, if you will. And so because not only do they exist to solve this problem of economy in Thailand, but what they're doing with their profits is they're creating clean water wells in Thailand. So there are, from these examples, there are some differences between social enterprises and the traditional nonprofit model. This isn't to say that a social enterprise cannot be a nonprofit. However, a traditional nonprofit is looking for donors and grants to fund their work. And while that can still be part of it, what we're asking social enterprises to do, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit models, is to have revenue streams where they're looking for customers to partner with you by paying for your product or service that you're offering, which actually allows you to continue doing the impact work and actually increase your impact as you serve more and more customers. And while neither is inherently better than the other, we're just really excited about the potential that for-profit and nonprofit social enterprises have to scale up in size and stay more sustainably over the long run. One thing that Lana did is, they originally were a nonprofit, but eventually had to form as a for-profit because they felt that their scale and their format as a nonprofit actually did not let them grow and have more impact. And so they've experienced a lot more freedom, approaching $1 million revenue size per year in all the coffee that they sell, because they are now a for-profit entity. There are also some difference we can see between social enterprises and traditional models. First, there's a difference in why money is made, where in traditional business, money is made because that's the goal for the business. And in social enterprise, it's actually seen as a tool for creating more impact. And again, nothing necessarily wrong with making money. It's just traditional business stops there. And so you're likely providing jobs and providing services that people want. And those are absolutely good things in the community. At the same time, social entrepreneurs would likely see this as a missed opportunity to go and use that money to make a difference in the world. And so another difference is that social enterprises impact is so integrated into the business that it's measured and it has goals to hit. And so to the same degree that traditional businesses track money and make financial goals, social enterprises choose to set goals and measure for both finance and impact. And so through our accelerator program that I mentioned here earlier, that's something that we help our social enterprises integrate into what they do. And so there is actually an origin story between the two, and they're often different. And for social enterprises, their inspiration actually comes from solving problems in the world that they care about. And so this often starts with the why. And so to really summarize why you should consider building a social enterprise, it's because we believe you can grow big as you need to make money to change the world, or at least more realistically, change someone else's world. And so honestly, like I could end it right there, and this could be a motivational speech, and I could sell you an online course for $29.99, but I don't feel like that's going to be most helpful for you. And so I'm going to do neither of those things, but I do want to talk about how to build your own social enterprise and how do we get started. And so for those of you who maybe have started a business or have tried to start a social enterprise, you may have found it to be overwhelming to try and figure out everything about your business at once. And so in our opinion, that's what makes writing a traditional business plan often so difficult, where you might write dozens of pages pretending like you're going to know what's going to happen, even in your best research, right? However, in our experience in the startup phase, it's actually not what's most helpful to start up social enterprises. I often equate this to a master's program where if you're writing a thesis, you don't write your thesis first and then do the research. You're actually doing the work and the research and writing your thesis as you go. And that's really what we encourage in the startup phase, is that really go into the real world and do small tests of your businesses as quickly as possible to figure out what works and doesn't work in this business idea that you have. What we don't want you to do, and what we also acknowledge, is that we as people do not have an unlimited amount of time, energy, or capital. And if you do, that's fantastic. But most of the entrepreneurs that come to us don't necessarily have an unlimited amount of any of those. And so that's why we've designed something called our 6 steps to building a social enterprise. And so this takes the best parts of traditional business plan and lays it out in a practical and effective way so that we can test ideas quickly and not waste our time on things that may not matter and that point us in the right direction. And so, again, I don't feel like we have unlimited time for this. And so our hope is, what should you be, that you figure out what you should be focused on and continue to come back to this question of what should I focus on? And so the best feedback that I've received from this context was I didn't know what I needed to focus on to do next. But now I know exactly what I need to do next. And I've heard that over and over and over again over the years, is this is the best way to really get started in our ecosystem. And so today, I have a shortened version of this content. We do have a whole program on this here in our Social Enterprise Academy. But let's go through these steps. And like I mentioned, this year we've raised about $25,000 for startup capital in social enterprises. And so we hope that this process here that we're going to walk through is also helpful in your successful submission to SparkTank this year. So let me go ahead and start with number 1. And so even though you're muted, you may be sitting by yourself and maybe watching this recording even 3 years from now, but I want you to read these out loud with me as I go through these. But the first one, and let's read out loud, is find a problem. Step 2, talk to customers. Step 3, brainstorm solutions. 4 is build an MVP. 5 is improve your MVP. And 6 is find more customers. And there's a few things that you might notice here, is that the problem comes first and the solution comes later. Yes, problem first, solution later. Their problem first, your solution later. Problem first, solution later. And I'll say it one more time: problem first, solution later. And I know I'm being ridiculous at this point, but you have no idea how helpful this is. Uh, because I've had a lot of entrepreneurs over the years that come to us with absolutely fantastic ideas. Maybe they have their grandmother's pie recipe and they swear it's the best thing on earth. And while it might absolutely be true, oftentimes in this example, say it's delicious pie, people don't drive across town for delicious pie. They actually might be looking for something convenient, affordable, and local versus something times the next town over. And while it might be a slight miss, that oftentimes is the biggest difference why organizations and companies don't scale, is they're barely missing the mark and they're so close. And so as we are also going through this, we try to reduce as much business jargon as we can, but some of it is kind of unavoidable. So you might be asking, what's an MVP? Is it LeBron James? Is it, right? Who? It's not most valuable player. It's actually minimal viable product or minimum viable product. And it's basically the simplest thing you can build in your social enterprise to solve your customer's problem. The cool thing about your MVP is that it's the best way to get started and for you to learn about your customer's problem that you're trying to solve. And so the step we are going to spend the most time on is going to be step 1, because we really do find it foundational to this whole process, and it often is the heart and the soul of what you're trying to do. And so it's also the step with the most SparkTank application questions related to it. And so again, I hope that you find this helpful to your process. So again, let's start with step 1, which is find a problem. And so we're asking you to start here and find a very specific problem that someone has. And so if you came here with an idea for a social enterprise, let's take a second to think about that idea. Where did it come from? What inspired it? And so hopefully what inspired it is a problem that you see that someone else has, or maybe that you have. And if you can think of a problem that your idea solves right now, no, if you can't, think of a problem that solves your idea right now, it's not a problem, because I want to keep going and the connections may start to form here. And so what the heck is a problem? And we define a problem as a pain point, a frustration or difficult that someone else has. It could often be their friction point. And so that's what we're going to focus on. And so another way to frame this when we think of a problem and imagine the other half of these sentences as you hear them. And so the first one could be, I wish such and such, right? This would be better if XYZ existed. Can you believe this? That's just not right. And so these are examples of key phrases we've heard over the years as others talk about their problems. It often could be an injustice, an inequality, some oppression in our community. And so these are some of the most severe problems that our world has. And so we do want to work on solving or addressing these. And so to put a bit more clarity, here are some examples. I have so many things to do every day and I can't keep track of it all. So I end up forgetting some of them. Or I want to eat healthy, but I don't have enough time. Or I have a criminal record and no one's willing to hire me. It could also be, I can't drink the tap water in my neighborhood because it's so polluted and toxic. And so let's all take a second to think of a problem, right? We might see one in the community. We might have one that we care about. At the same time, there might be something that you're really excited about to address. And so use that as a guide in this process as we're thinking about problems to solve. And so as you've already noticed in social enterprise, there are 2 types of problems that we have. And if you haven't, I do want to break these down as there's an impact problem and there's a business problem. And an impact problem is one that addresses a social and environmental issue. I think of this as your North Star, and it's typically easy to care about. And it's likely what inspired your idea or inspired you to join us here today. Or it could be the money that we're advertising in the SparkTank Pitch Fest competition. However, no matter why you're here, our hope is that you are building social enterprises to support our community here. And so the impact usually feels like the heart, the mission, and the purpose of the business, and it can be a rallying point for your team to remember why you're doing the work that you're doing. And some of your customers will actually want to buy from you because of your mission. Not all, but some. And then there's the business problem. which is the other side of the coin. And so here you're finding someone who will pay for the product you're offering. This is the engine of your social enterprise per se. And the business problem is where you may make money, or you have to make money so that you can stay alive and grow. And we have a phrase around this idea, and we say no money, no mission, more money, more mission. And it gets funnier after you say it 100 times, but it's really true. In social enterprise, we want to help you grow yourselves so that you grow your impact. And so in these two main problems here, we're going to focus on specific people. And actually, sometimes this beneficiary and customer are the exact same person, but other times they are not. And so I'll give you an example of, think of daycare, right? Daycare, you yourself would pay for daycare and your child is the beneficiary of that model. And so if businesses spend all their time advertising and asking the beneficiary in this situation what they want to see in daycare, I think of my 3-year-old son, and he'd probably say, I want more toys, I want more snacks, I don't want to nap, and I just want to watch videos and play with my friends all day. However, if you ask me, the customer, I would say I want my child to be well fed and cared for. I want to make sure that, they're taking trips to the potty. Right? There's all these things that I'm going to care about that my son probably doesn't really care about. And so this specific example here really could make the difference as to how people build businesses and why they're not selling their products or services, because oftentimes they're building it for the wrong person. And so we want to help you build those in the right way. And so again, the person who is your beneficiary benefits from your social or environmental problem that you're addressing. And the customer is the person that paying you to solve their problem. And so part of what we want to do is become really good at both of these and constantly improve both understanding the problems and solving them. In community music school example that I gave you earlier, the beneficiaries are their students getting the music lesson, and the customer is the school district because they pay for the music lessons. For years, I've used a Headspace meditation app, and in this one, Headspace is actually I'm Headspace's customer and beneficiary because I'm paying for that app, and I'm also receiving the mental health benefits from meditation. And so this could happen in either way. Is totally okay as long as you can make it work, but both of them are viable options. And so you might be asking, and we can pause here for a little bit, that if finding a problem is so important, how do you make sure you find a problem or that you found a good problem? And so one of the best ways that we would say is like try scratching your own itch, right? What problems do you have and how can you make your own life better? And this is from personal experience. And it could be an impact or a business problem because you know the pain point yourself and you also know potential solutions that would work or would not work. And another example, it's to observe the world around us. And maybe this didn't happen directly to it, but but it's something that you've still seen. And so this would be keeping your eyes open and listening to community. And then finally, the last one would be to further engage and use, empathy into other people's experiences. So listening to stories, observing actions, and empathizing with what you think might be a difficult experience for them. Honestly, empathy is so important. And if you want to start a social enterprise or any business for that matter, you're really going to have to understand your customers' problems. And so this could be as simple as stepping into someone else's shoes and understanding and feeling their pain points. Because if you can't do that, it's going to be hard to build something for them that will actually solve the problem for them. And so we don't have to spend a ton of time on this now, but I want to leave you with 2 simple exercises that are helpful tools for spotting problems. First, you can think through your own day and recognize different problems or difficulties that you face throughout your day. And for me, it'd be something simple like, all right, I wake up in the morning and I have to get ready. And then one minor inconvenience is that I hate putting on my socks, right? Another thing is that I'm stuck in traffic for, a lot of time in my morning. My son doesn't want to put on clothes to go to school again. Like that's another problem, right? Like there are things that are happening in my day that are, what are ways that could make my day easier and smoother? I sometimes forget to eat lunch because I don't plan my lunch, right? Like there are things in my day that I need to address that actually could make my day better. And so when we think through these things, right, there could be things that we don't like doing, or things that we avoid, or things that you wish no one else would have to go through. On the other end is of this exercise is that you can think of the day of someone you care about and try to discover problems they face. This could be a family member, someone you work with, or a stranger you encountered as you went through your day, such as a family sleeping in their car. Similar to your day, think through things that they don't like doing or they want to avoid, or things that they would never want to go through again. These could be roadblocks in their life. And so how do you find the right problem? You could have found a problem, but is it the right problem to focus on? And so how do you know this is an important problem? How do you know this is a problem where you can make money as a social entrepreneur? And how do you know this is a problem for you and your team that is the right one to focus on? And so the first step that we encourage folks is to employ some self-awareness, right? In this part of the journey, there are going to be things that tear at our heart and make us excited to do something about them. And so do we generally care about these problems that we're trying to solve as social entrepreneurs? And then there's empathy, right? I find empathy to be the key for life, but in social entrepreneurship, it also allows you to step into somebody else's shoes of what could be your beneficiary or customer. And so this allows you to make decisions with them in mind every step of the way, and both your impact and business will benefit from it. The next one is this idea of hair on fire. And a lot of venture capital investors talk about finding customers whose hair are on fire. And so the problem is so intense that if you hand them this coffee cup or a brick, they would actually snatch it from your hands and start trying to put it out, because they don't know what to do about that intense fire. That's a big pain. It's a kind of a ridiculous metaphor, but it's what venture capital uses. Because then what venture capital wants to do is then come in with a bucket of water that's absolutely better to put out that problem. And if enough people have this problem, that's how a business scales. And so again, these are serious problems for our customers or beneficiaries. And so they really can't afford to not pay someone to deal with these problems that they have. It really is a big deal for them. But how do you know for sure? Again, part of what we want to do and encourage folks to do in this process is to talk to customers. And that really is what becomes step 2 in this process. And so I do want to share some quick lessons from what we learned. And so I have an example of a social enterprise and one of our partners here who spent all of their time for 6 months talking to what they thought were customers in their financial literacy app. And so they wanted to develop an app for young people who wanted to learn personal finance skills. And so they spent 6 months talking to students at university campuses, people under 25, maybe those in the workforce. And they realized at the end of the day that they actually spent 6 months talking to beneficiaries and not customers, because it actually were university and banks that would pay for that financial literacy app. And as you may guess, they really started to understand how to solve the problem for the young people, but all of a sudden they had really no idea how the banks and universities were going to pay for it, let alone if they really wanted to use that kind of app. And so don't forget to make sure that you're solving a problem for both your beneficiary and your customers, and that you're learning for both about what they want. And in reality, one thing that we know is that universities do pay for financial literacy resources for their students. However, sometimes you don't hear about them, and sometimes they're not very good. And so that's something that they were working on to solve themselves. Then the last thing before we head into number 2 is I want to give you some questions that you can use in your own time to reflect and see if this is a good problem for you to choose. And we actually pull these from Y Combinator and their own process of how do I know if the problem I'm solving is worth it. There's also an author called Eric Ries of the Lean Startup, and we often use his adages of failing fast, failing small, and failing forward, where we very quickly in these processes want to figure out what works and what doesn't work, because we know we don't have a lot of time and unlimited time, energy, or capital to work on these things. And so also remember that you don't have to be writing a ton of notes in this process. We are going to email you these PowerPoints in the next day or two. So don't hurt yourself trying to write these down at the speed of light. We will be sharing these with you. But number one is, how intense is your customer's problem? Number two is, how often does your customer have this problem? And these really are my two favorite questions when you're thinking of a new idea. And so again, asking what is the intensity of it and how often do they have it? The next two questions are question number three. Do my customers know that they have the problem that I'm trying to solve? And number four, how many people have this problem? This really does become a great checklist to run through as you're talking about the questions that you're trying to solve. Number five, are they willing to pay you to solve it? Have you experienced this problem yourself? And if you haven't, are you close with anyone that has? Number seven, can you build a solution for that problem? And number eight, how easy is it for your customers to find you or for you to find them? And I actually would run through these 8 questions for both impact and business problems that you land on, because it really is important for you to figure out if both these problems are worth trying to build a social enterprise around. And so just a quick note, the problems that you choose don't have to be problems that no one else has solved before. It doesn't even have to be original. Just make sure that you're focused on the problem and that you're improving your product or service, and that you're figuring out marketing and sales language and other aspects of your business that other people care about. And if you are more focused on their problem than other potential solutions, then you can go with that. That significantly increases your chances to build something that they want more and that you'll buy from. And I think of examples in our daily lives where you use something, but you're not super satisfied with it, but you really don't have a better alternative than what you're using. It could be an app, it could be a spreadsheet, it could be an article of clothing, it could be you go into McDonald's for the 10th time, even though they got your order wrong 9 times in a row. But you, for the most part, know what to expect from McDonald's. And this is what I encourage our entrepreneurs is, if you could solve a problem better, or even somewhat better than what I've mentioned here, you really do have an opportunity in the market to grow a social enterprise. And so this brings me to questions on our SparkTank application. And so I do want to take a quick break from the 6 steps and go through a few questions from the SparkTank application that have to do with finding a problem. And so first is, why are you starting this business? And this is a question that I would often ask 3 ways. But when I think of why are you starting a business, I would ask why, focus on the why are you doing this? Then I would ask, why are you, the entrepreneur, doing this? And then finally, I would ask, why are you doing this? This being this type of business model. And so it's the exact same question asked 3 different ways, but really it's looking to get to your motivation and why you chose this over anything else. Similarly, what's your motivation? Why are you compelled to do this when you could do anything else? Or really, you could choose to do nothing at all. What are you hoping to gain from this? And then tell us about why you're doing this and why you'll keep going when things get hard. Because I'd love to tell you that business is easy and it's a great way to make money, which it is. And it's all rainbows, unicorns, and butterflies, but it's really not. Business can be very hard and entrepreneurship can be very tricky. And so again, oftentimes the heart and the problem that we're solving is what becomes our motivation to continue going. The next question is, what is your vision for your business? Where do you see this social enterprise going? What do you see it doing? What do you see yourself? Where do you see yourself going in the social enterprise? And if your social enterprise were to grow to be successful, how would you define success and why? Right? What impact would it accomplish? The third question is, what problem are you solving for your customers? And why does your customer want to buy this? Here, we're focusing in on the business problem, not as much as the impact problem, but we'd like for you to be as specific as possible. Remember, we want to narrow in on specific business problems. And so I'd encourage you to use as many adjective and specific pronouns here, enough so that we could clearly understand the problem and what it feels like. And honestly, it's this, if you do well in describing this, is even though we haven't felt this problem, you may actually make us feel like we actually had. And so again, the judges on this panel, which is no one on our CCT team, are looking at these proposals and want to understand these questions better. The next piece is what social environmental problem are you solving? And this is your impact problem. Again, similar to your business problem, we're going to encourage you to be as specific as possible and narrow in on a specific problem. So get those adjectives and specific pronouns in here. And again, make it so that we can feel it even if we haven't actually experienced it. The fifth question here is, why did you choose this social and environmental problem to solve? And from what I've seen, when founders are more connected to problems that impact our business, they are more likely to succeed. So again, tell us about the connection that you have to this impact problem and why it's so important that you are going to push through the challenges and possibly the difficult stretches that you find. The next question, which is our sixth question, is what from your experience and background has prepared you to start this social enterprise? This to me feels like the most interviewee question in our proposals process. But building on the last question, do you have the skills and expertise necessary to contribute your portion to this business? Are you going to be responsible for selling things, and have you sold anything before? If you're going to be responsible for the finances, have you ever kept books before? Tell us about skills and experiences that you have that prepared you to do this. In addition to this, you may have some personal experience or turning points in your life that has created a fire in you where you cannot not do something about this. And so if you haven't addressed that and other questions, this is a good place to do that. And our seventh question is, if there is anyone else on your founding team, tell us about them and their role in the company. And so now that we've gotten to know you in the last question, tell us about any co-founders that you may have in starting your business. What do they bring to the table that you don't already have? Why does having them on board make you more likely to solve the impact problem and or the business problem? And why do they make your social enterprise more likely to succeed? I will say that this isn't necessarily people who cheer you on, but it's people who agreed to help you out from time to time, or people that you're going to use as sounding boards. These are people who are pretty invested into your company and are probably potentially putting in other hours, maybe similar to you, and they probably deserve some equity ownership of the company. And if you don't know what equity ownership, that's okay. We'll be happy to walk you through it if you want to learn more about that outside of this course, or excuse me, outside of this workshop. So let's go on to step 2. And we're more than halfway through this, guys. But again, we want to do our best to give you tools and resources to build your social business and then also address SparkTank questions in this process. But we've talked about step 1. Let's move into step 2 and what you need to start talking to your customers and beneficiaries about the problem that they have. So the concept of just talking to people can be pretty broad. So when we talk to customers or beneficiaries, what's the best way to do that? And so really for us, the best way to do this, and what we would say is, we need to really figure out what's important to figure out. And so here's a few notes that should help guide this for you. So you should only be talking to people who have the problem. Right now, you're trying to learn about this problem and you only want the perspectives of people who have the actual problem you're trying to solve. I know it might be tempting, but part of what I'm going to encourage you not to do is to talk to your mom or to your bestie and tell them what you're doing here, unless they have this specific problem. Because anything I talk to my mom about and tell her, she's probably going to say like, honey, that's a great idea. You're going to do it, right? And she's not going to have a lot of feedback from me because she doesn't often have the problem that I'm trying to solve. And so again, the only exceptions here, if you're talking to someone who is an expert in an area, like a social worker or someone who serves lower income families or a therapist, or who with people who have, experienced trauma, they might have insights that even the customers may not have. But I would say you absolutely need to hear from people who have the problem that you're trying to solve, those that are experiencing it firsthand. The second goal is for you to listen and not to talk. It is very tempting to go into these times, and talk about your solution. We're not there yet. We really want to use these times to ask questions and not to pitch our ideas. I will explain that more in a second here. Also, we want to focus on questions that lead you and become more interested in something specific that they're solving. So we say be more broad and open-ended and don't ask yes or no questions. right? A closed-ended question would be like, um, do you know you have this problem? No. Do you like the solutions that you're using? No. Do you know what to do about this problem? No. Right? Like that's what it'd be. Would a closed-ended question, but something like an open-ended question would be like, can you tell me more about the problem that you have in your day-to-day life? What solutions are you currently using to solve that problem? Or what about the solutions that you're using do you not love? And I have a list of these questions too that I'll be given to y'all for you to use in your customer conversation processes. And so what we want to do is help them lead you to their problem and avoid the temptation to lead them to your solution. And so what I would say, and I don't want you to get your hopes up that you're going to end up with a sale at the end of this, because that's not the goal. If their problem is really severe and they're ready to pay for you to try it and solve, that's great, but that's not the goal here. The goal really is to listen about their problem. And then your solution, right, is your current best idea to solve their problem, but the foundation is their problem, which you are trying to discover more about. And so to learn more about this problem, you're going to have to find people that have the problem and you're trying to learn more about them. And so in these open conversations, I want to give you these tools, which are really 5 questions that we've pulled from 2 entrepreneurs, Ian Shaw and Eric Mijakovsky, that I have seen to be super helpful to our entrepreneurs over the years. And so you'll use these questions to open up natural conversations. And even though you have this list of questions, I will say don't get stuck on these questions. They're simply just helpful to start a natural conversation. But the first question is, what is your number one challenge around blank? Right? What is your number one challenge about, getting ready in the morning or taking a lunch or going to sleep? Number 2, can you tell me about the last time you had this problem? Well, I experience it every day. I experience it twice a week, right? People will tell you a little bit more about the frequency as you start opening up these questions to them. To me, again, these first 2 questions are probably the most important ones, and they're going to point you directly to what I would say gold mines of information. And when entrepreneurs start to open up about their problems that they're facing, sometimes it feels like they're just dropping a pile of money on your lap, because they're basically telling you, build a solution for this problem, please, I need help. And so in the first question, you're going to have to figure out how to fill in the blank. And so you need to be able to describe the problem in a general way with as few words as possible. So I gave you an example earlier, but other things could be like when, this entrepreneur was building their financial literacy app, they simply asked a question, what is your number one challenge around managing your money? Pretty straightforward, right? And in the second question, we're looking to understand the story and narrative around their experience when they experienced this problem. And so their experience here will give you a lot more context so that you can later figure out what's a good way for your solution to be really the hero in this story. There are 3 other questions, right? Why was this hard? Speaking about their problem. Have you tried anything to solve this problem? And number 5, what don't you love about the solutions you've already tried? And while these might not be as pivotal as the first 2, they could be really helpful, especially if the conversation isn't flowing naturally. The third question is to ask them to describe friction or pain points that they have, which is super helpful to understand. The fourth is doing 2 things at once. So first, it's trying to give you a list of competing solutions that you should look into and see how you compare. And then second, it's letting you know whether this problem is important enough for them to have actually done something about it. And so if they haven't tried anything yet to solve a problem, you don't have to give up and find a new problem, but it's probably a sign that it's not a super intense problem for them. And so the 5th question here is, which helps you know what you need to prioritize in order for your solution to stand out against the competition. So right here, they're basically handing you a to-do list of things they want that they don't actually already have in the solutions that they're using. And so when we talk to customers, what we're going to ask you, don't, be so rigid and be stuck on a list of questions that we're going to hand you, but ask the person one of the questions and they probably open up some doors for you to walk right through. And so remember that you're trying to learn about their problem as if you're falling in love with that problem. Be obsessed with that problem, but resist the urge to tell them right away about the great idea and solution that you have for them. And so these conversations around their number one challenge tell you what their biggest pain point is in this area, and specifically what you should be solving for them. And so when you're having these conversations, so many things that you didn't expect will become clear. You'll figure out a name you want for your social enterprise that your customers will respond to. You might figure out how to word your social media posts better. You may figure out where you can sell your products or service and what you should say and more. And so again, really encourage you to listen closely to what they have and use the information to guide all of your decisions. And something I will say is that a lot of our programs here at the CCT here at FPU, we use this very exact process when we're listening and talking to community. And so it's not like I'm here like, hey, here's 6 steps that we never used. It's like, here's 6 steps that we probably use almost every day as we're working with people in our programs and as we're partnering in the city. So I do have some more questions. So let's go ahead and pause again and go through some of the related SparkTank questions. But the first question in this section is going to ask you to describe your typical or target customer. And so after you have a few conversations with people who have this problem, and remember, you have essentially 5.5 weeks from today to submit your proposal. So you have enough lead time to lean into this. But after you have a few conversations with people who have this problem, it should be pretty easy to tell us about the typical customer you're targeting for your business problem. What are common characteristics they have? Do they all have similar interests? Do they spend time in specific places? Do they have certain job titles? Do they work at certain types of organizations? Also, why is this a problem for them and why do they want this solved? Show us that you have a good understanding of who you are trying to sell your products or services to. The next one is to describe your target or typical beneficiary, moving from customer to beneficiary instead. So basically, it's how the problem relates to them and the problem that they have and how you're going to solve this for them. Tell us a little bit more. Do they have an age? Do they have a gender? Are they young, right? Are they a certain generation? Like, tell us a little bit more about them. And last one is competitors. Are there any other similar businesses that are solving a problem? If yes, tell us about them. You may be selling pies, but someone sells cakes, right? Like that might be a competitor to you. You also could be selling things like customized clothing. And while they might be no one that bejoles t-shirts like you do, however, some people, when we're solving problems for them and it's clothing, they might just be looking for a cheap t-shirt. They might not be looking for bejeweled, t-shirts. And so again, consider that your competitor might not look exactly like what you're doing. And so if you say, I don't have any competitors, you probably haven't looked enough or even really considered and understood the problem that you're solving for your customers. And so again, they might be solving the problem a different way and their solution is going to be different, but they really at times could be solving the exact same problem that you are. And that would actually make them your competitor by default. Excuse me. All right, let's move to step 3 here. And then I have 2 more sections here, and then I want to jump into some question and answer. But if you do have questions, I do encourage you, stick them in the chat. I'm happy to address this as we're going through this presentation. But the next one here is brainstorming solutions. And so now that we have found specific problems and we've listened to people who have problems, it's time for step 3, which most of you are like, finally, we're there, right? But this is brainstorming solutions. And there's a man here in the United States named Michael Seibel, and he's the founder and CEO of Y Combinator. And Y Combinator is the largest accelerator in the country. They've produced companies like Uber and Airbnb, Stripe, Instacart. If you're using technology today to solve problems in your world, Y Combinator probably designed it. But part of what Michael Seibel has said for years is that most entrepreneurs think that their genius and special sauce is in their solution. However, the best entrepreneurs know that their genius and special sauce is in how deeply they understand their customer's problem. And this is huge because deeply understanding the problem is the best advantage that you can have. And I have to say, some of our largest companies in the world, Google, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, they invest so much time, energy, and capital into understanding customers' patterns, behaviors, and pain points so that they can make things better. That's why we're always getting, updates in the Apple Store, for apps that we're using, because people are understanding how apps are being used and maybe how things could be better or how apps are not being used. And so again, they want to understand the customer's problems better to create better solutions. And so when we think of brainstorming solutions, the first thing you should do is look back at your interview notes from step 1 for inspiration and to guide your brainstorming. And so now that you've learned exactly what the problem is, you have the target to aim at. And so you should have a much clearer picture of the specific problem they are experiencing. So here are a few questions for you to ask yourself as you go through the interviews. What do they have in common? What do I notice that's important to them? And what is the specific problem they are expecting that I can pull their responses from? Excuse me. What is specific problems they are experiencing that I could pull from their responses? The next thing I always encourage folks to do is go hang out with some friends, get some food, some drinks, right? Get a whiteboard and really start having some fun in mapping and creating some solutions. I know for some of us who are maybe working on our own, it's a temptation to do this all by ourselves on a whiteboard, but I really do encourage you, get some people who care about this and would do this with you. And so the first step, right, in this is write a specific problem that you're trying to solve in the middle of the whiteboard. And then from there, come up with as many ideas as you can. And some of them might be really weird or crazy ideas, but at some point, part of what we're going to ask you to do is choose an idea you want to date for first and use that as your starting point. Now, this isn't life advice, guys, but this is entrepreneurship advice. But we're going to ask you, don't marry your current idea, but date it. Because you're going to find better ideas over time. And so we're going to ask you to ditch the original idea for the one that's better. And so be open to your idea growing and iterating and changing over time, truly, so that you can solve problems better. And then we have a 5-star exercise. And this is actually something created by founder of Airbnb, Brian Chesky. But really the idea here is to really think about what a 1-star experience on Yelp would look like in your business, a 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, 5-star, and really start to think about what you can realistically do. And part of this activity isn't always focused on how do I get as many 5-star reviews as possible. This idea actually is, how can I avoid having 1 or 2-star experiences for my customers? And so this is something we do with our entrepreneurs to really help them understand what they're trying to do. But again, for sake of time, we won't fully jump into this today. All right, our next question here, and a series of questions in our SparkTank applications, and that correlate with this section. The first one being, do you have any ideas for different social enterprises? And so this one is an optional question, so you don't necessarily have to answer it. But we're looking for ways that you're thinking about, different business ideas. Maybe you've had different solution ideas for the same problem, or maybe you have an idea that addresses a completely different problem. We'd love to hear about it. And yes, to this question isn't necessarily to score well on SparkTank or be successful as an entrepreneur, but we had an entrepreneur a number of years ago who came to us with an idea where she wanted to create an internship program for lower income youth to code. And so in the Social Enterprise Academy, we had asked, what other ideas do you have? And so she also had an idea of selling candles to promote mental health. And even though she started with a coding academy for youth, she actually pivoted to candles. And, now she's become really big across the country. You've seen her on the Today Show. You've seen her on Good Morning America. You've seen her in multiple areas on TV because of how big her business has grown. And that was because she realized she actually had more passion and energy for the candle business than she did for low-income youth. She just felt that lower income youth coding academy could have more impact. But in this story, it actually was the opposite. And so again, keep in mind that it might not be your first or even second idea to succeed. Sometimes it's a third or fourth idea. And so again, we want to foster that with you. And then we talk about building an MVP. So again, minimum viable product. And the goal here is to move fast. I think of the example of, when we solve a transportation problem, we're not trying to build cars for everyone. We're trying to build a skateboard to learn quicker, because it actually is the fastest way to solve the transportation issue. It doesn't solve it in the best way, but it does solve it at the very least. And this actually allows you to test it with your customers way sooner. But really the purpose of an MVP here is to learn more about a customer's problem based on their actions. And so again, learning is on their actions, not just their words. And so it's really important, because at this stage, it's helpful to see if people will put their money where their mouth is, right? Like most actions will speak louder than words in these situations. And so the other purpose is that an MVP is helpful in learning as much as you can about whether your solution actually solves the problem in the shortest amount of time. You don't want to spend 52 weeks designing a solution for a problem and then realizing that it doesn't actually solve the problem after all. And so if you spent a year building this first version, you get one test run. But if you spend 1 week on each version of your MVP, you have 52 tests that you can run in the same amount of time. It actually would be less costly because of time, energy, and inventory if you find the right solution, in the 8th week rather than the 52nd week. And so this really is a hidden key that's helpful to know as to where you're trying to start a social enterprise. And most new businesses that fail don't get crushed by competition or even run out of money. Research shows that most new business ideas fall apart because founders lose their sense of momentum and decide to give up because they haven't quite figured out how their solution solves the problem. And so our hope here is that you move quickly with your MVP and this really helps you maintain a sense of momentum and keep you and your team feeling hopeful and focused. When I think of an MVP, I think of a food delivery service, and this was before Instacart, right? But this founder had an idea for an app that would provide a grocery delivery service on a regular basis. She could have spent months drawing and mocking up a version of an app, spending tens of thousands of dollars, building out a test version of the app, or planning out every move and writing out a 50-page business plan. But she knew that she wouldn't learn anything about what her customers actually needed and who would be most excited about this. So instead, what she decided to do was go to a single mom support group and offer to take their money and buy and deliver groceries by hand herself. And so how did she take their orders? Well, all these meetings, she would ask them what they wanted and wrote it down on a piece of paper with a pencil. And so how did she receive last minute order changes? Well, she would text their cell phones or call them and ask them if their list was still up to date. And so how did she get feedback from her customers? She watched the body language as she made deliveries, asked what could have been done better, and she kept track of who kept using her services. And by doing this, she learned an incredible amount about what they needed and the problem she was solving for them in just a few weeks. And so without large amounts of money spent or time wasted by building the app first or buying special equipment, right, what she eventually went to do was really truly build the app. But she actually knew exactly what her customers needed because she had actually worked with them so much and ran so many different experiments that she knew all the features that were needed and which ones were unnecessary or distracting. And so in building your MVP, really your goal here, I would say, and while this isn't always realistic, right, is build an MVP within a week. Your goal is to move fast, it's to learn quick, and it's to increase your chances of success. And so some of the requirements for an MVP is really that first, it should technically solve the problem of your customer, and it should ideally spend no money, right, or as little money as possible. Sometimes it could be a little bit embarrassing, the level of MVP that we produce. Maybe you offer to have a service performed for somebody and then you show up yourself to do it manually, and they may think it's funny or odd, but stay the course and just focus on trying to learn about their problem if this is a good idea for a solution. And keep in mind, early on, the goal is to learn based on their behavior. So really here, we need to resist the temptation to impress them with any bells or whistles you come up with. And so really that's it for the process of building your MVP. And so I hope to hear more about the MVPs that you're building here, because in step 5, after you've built your MVP, we then want to improve it and test it with our customers. And so the first part of it, improving your MVP, is to test it. So here are some best practices I've learned from others on how to test your MVP so that you don't get in the way and ruin your learning opportunity. And so after you've taken your time to build your MVP, you're going to take your MVP to some of those potential customers that you've been talking to, and you're going to let them use it. Remember, only test on people who have the problem. And here are a few notes on how to have them test it. And so when you have them test it, don't say anything, hand it to them, no instructions, nothing. You need to see if it's simple enough to figure out, because eventually your goal is for your customers to be able to figure out how to use it without you being there. And so ideally give it to them in the same context where they usually have this problem, so that test is as real as possible. And as they're using their MVP, listen to what they say, watch their facial expressions, see which parts are hardest for them to figure out. You really gain more truth from their nonverbal cues than you'll learn from their words that they're telling you during and afterwards. And so while they're using it, see if your solution actually solves the problem. If they struggle to solve their problem with whatever you handed them, that's actually really helpful feedback. And I find that as a win. And so again, some of this might be kind of funny or incredibly difficult, but you really do have to watch them in struggle and confusion at times, because you'll feel bad, but you really do have to resist the urge to help them. And again, this purpose is really to help you learn whether your MVP is ready to move forward into the product service category, or whether it truly is an MVP. Excuse me. And so the second part of step 5 here is determining what you're going to change in order to improve your MVP. And so after a few test runs, you need to take everything into account: their feedback, what you have observed, and anything else you've gathered. From there, you will decide what the most important improvements are going to be that you need to make in a time-bound time, oftentimes in a week. And so keep in mind, when you're deciding how to improve your MVP, you have to maintain a balance between what they said and what they actually did. And whatever insights that have come to you, again, keep those in mind and really use that as feedback in this MVP process. And then keep iterating and keep cycling through the process and testing and improvement. My encouragement to you is, an MVP isn't quite an MVP if it's really bad and it actually doesn't actually solve a problem, right? And so in this MVP phase, what I also don't want you to hear us say is that we want you to put bad products or services out in the world. That's not quite it. It's actually the fact that you don't have time, energy, or capital necessarily to build something perfect yet. But the process and the goal of the MVP phase is to learn and to make things better. And so after you've decided what improvements you're going to make, again, take that time to really move forward to creating the right solution that would actually solve the problem. And hopefully one they'll pay for. And this is pretty simple, right? But people always ask, like, when is this no longer MVP? And when is it ready to sell? I often sillily say is that you offer it to someone and they say yes. They blow it. It's mind blowing, right? I know, right? But in all seriousness, like, I don't want this to be overcomplicated, because it's really not. We don't need to be stuck on terminology here. Version testing, beta, MVP, there's a lot of phrases out there, but really we need to keep it simple. We want to make something people want and sell it to them and that they want to buy from us. And then at the last step, it's find more customers. And again, this 6 steps is all focused on startup. This isn't scale. This isn't sustaining. This isn't franchising. This isn't even just diversifying operations. All this is focused on startups, which most of us probably find ourselves at this point in time. And so this is really where it starts to get exciting and it has the potential to take off. And so now that we've built something, the customers are starting to pay for it. We got to find more of them. And so this may lead to an obvious question, but how do I reach more people? How do I find people who have this problem? And so we want a couple things. We want to figure out a couple things here. So where do people hang out who have this problem? Could it be in person? Is it online? And so when we say these people, right, it's people that have this specific problem. Where's their attention? Where do their eyeballs spend time? Who has their attention and why? There are also a few ways you can do this. You can talk to your existing customers and ask if they know anybody else who would be interested. You can also think about where your existing customers spend time, or you can think about who has your existing customers' attention and how you can get there to find more people like them. Social media is also a default. It's actually pretty simple and easy to get millions and millions of opinions, right? However, from your perspective of trying to start a business, it actually could be very helpful because it allows you to engage in customer conversations with potential customers at a scale like never before. What I will say is that if you're using social media as a megaphone, most marketing experts will tell you you're doing it wrong, right? You don't want to use this as a way to just shout and talk about what you're doing, right? But it really should be more of a conversation, a two-way conversation. And so it's incredibly valuable because of how it can help you learn from others that you've actually never met and that you potentially want to convert into customers. You can actually engage with these people by listening to them and asking them direct questions and finding these right people. You just have to use things like keywords and hashtags and popular pages that you're related in what you're building. And then lastly, we have sales channels, which is just a fancy way of saying you want to build many roads that connect to you and your customers. And so as you find more people that have this specific problem, you can start to figure out ways to sell them efficiently. That might be social media, like a page that links to your store or your website. It could be a local store where a lot of your potential customers visit. It could be a consultant or a salesperson who knows a lot of people who have this problem. And so if you're interested in learning about sales channels, you can often Google it or YouTube it, right? But again, we have programs that help with this as well. And so we don't quite have a time to do a deep dive here, but I do want to jump into more Spark Tank questions. So let's jump into a few here. What we want you to do is describe your social enterprise and what it does in 1 to 2 sentences. Again, this should include both your business and intended impact. And so by step 3 or 4, and definitely by this point in this process, you should be able to describe your social enterprise, what it is and what it does. But it's not always super simple. So we actually pull this phrase from Irma Ogwin, who is founder and co-CEO of Bitwise Industries here in Fresno. But she often says, we do blank for blank who blank, right? We do product or service for this type of person who has this unique characteristic. And so we would say things like, we deliver groceries for single working mothers who don't have time to shop for all their food for their family needs. It could be, we clean work uniforms for chemical plant workers who are legally required to keep their clothing chemical and odor-free, And so if you're stuck trying to summarize your social enterprise in 1 or 2 sentences, I would say use this framework because it's actually really simple and really helpful. Next up, we want to have you tell us how you're going to make money. And so you should have a decent idea of this, no matter what stage you're at, but obviously the more progress you have, the more clarity you'll be able to answer this question with. And so tell us a few ways, or even just the one way you're trying to make money, how you know someone will pay for that, and any plans you have for growing that over time. The next question here is, how will you find customers and how will customers find you? Pretty straightforward, but where can you reach out to your customers in a setting where they'd be open to hearing about your product or service? And on the flip side, how will you create pathways for your customers to find you? We really are looking for your thought process and your craftiness in this. Then we want to know, have you sold any products or services yet? And this helps us know where you're at in your journey. It's okay if you haven't sold anything yet, but if you have, that's definitely a certain level of validation from your customers. And so try to make this more than just a no in your yes answer, and tell us a little bit more of why you have or have not. And then at what point are you at today? Have you talked with any potential customers? Have you made any sales? And so we just want to know where you're at and what you've learned. It'd probably be a good idea to use the 6-step process described here as part of your answer to help you share where you are at in your process, in your progress and your process. All right, everyone's favorite section, and this really is my last section, along with the optional questions here, and then I want to jump into Q&A with y'all. But the last section we're going to cover really here is finance, and it's not going to take a long time, but it is critical to keeping your social enterprise alive. And so there are a few Spark Tank questions that deal with this. And so the first one is cost per sale. In business terms, this is understood as variable cost, but it's what it costs you to make each product or service one time. And so really, again, ditching the business jargon here. But a few examples of variable costs could be materials, time, and hourly wages, and commissions to people who sell products for you. If you want more details here, again, we have helpful resources for that, but you could also Google what a variable cost is to get a more comprehensive list of these. For example, think of how much you pay in gas. It's really dependent on how much you drive. If you don't drive, you don't really pay for gas, but if you're driving all the time, then it's variable, right? And so you're going to be paying more for gas. And this actually goes up or down depending on how many units you sell. And so make sure you can sell it for more than what it costs you to make. I know it sounds obvious, but I can't tell you the countless entrepreneurs we worked with over the years who were, would say like, hey, we have really good sales numbers, but we don't understand why we're not making money and our credit card account keeps going up. And then we cost analyze what they're doing and we realize that they're actually paying their customers to take their products and services. And so that takes a little bit of finessing too. The other thing that we encourage folks to not factor in is that we really do have to pay ourselves. And whether you don't do it right away or you do it, months from now, we really do encourage you to start paying yourself from day one. Because if your model really stops you from doing that from day one, that is a problem. And so we have to work on finances, on the numbers here. And so other founders will pay themselves the rate that they would pay someone else to do the same jobs, so that when they hire somebody, they actually can afford to transfer that pay to the next person. And the second cost are fixed cost or ongoing cost. And so again, this is what you pay to stay open, whether you sell 1,000 units or 0. And this could be things like renting office space, insurance, renting equipment and machinery, salaries, right? All these are fixed costs. No matter whether you sell a lot or a little, you still have to pay them out. And so you can Google fixed costs to get a more comprehensive list of examples. But really, you can think from your life. You have for car insurance, right? It's basically stays the same every month, just so you can have your car, even if you don't drive that much. And so again, fixed costs stay the same no matter how many units you sell. And at the beginning, you'll want to keep these as close to 0 as possible. So you really got to skip the fancy stuff like, 5th story lease on, office space. Do you really need all the bells and whistles on that website, right? There's just things that we could do without early on to get off the ground and really focus the money on where we need to focus it on. And again, we want to encourage you to not forget to factor fixed cost in when figuring out if you're going to sell enough and make money. And so fortunately, there's a way to calculate this, which we would call break-even point, right? And really the break-even point is when you begin to not lose money in your venture, if you will. And so this helps you figure out how many units you need to sell in order to exactly cover your fixed and variable costs. And so this is the point where you don't lose money and you begin to make profits. And so after you do the division, you want to make sure that you always round up to the whole number, because if you get 67.3, you can't sell 67.3 products usually. And if you sell 67, you're still losing money. But if you sell 68, you've passed the break-even point. But the simple formula here is fixed cost divided by, and in parentheses, sales minus variable costs. Carlos, what does that even mean? Right? Well, let me give you an example here. Right. So say in this scenario, the sales price for your product is $100. It costs you $80 to produce it, and you have $845 of fixed cost. Someone figure that out yet? Not yet. All right. No, it's okay. I have the number here. All right. But the break-even point in this situation is actually 42.25. But in this simple example, we can't sell less than 1 unit because we'd be losing money. It's actually 43. Right. So 43 units is the least amount that we can sell without losing money a month. And the second reason this equation is helpful is because you can make adjustment to any of those numbers and see the impact it will have on your business. What if you sold these items for the same amount and lowered variable cost? What if you increased fixed cost? You can see how many units you would need then. You can see how many units you would need then to sell to give you the numbers that you need. And so again, you can also Google break-even point to figure this out in more detail, but really this is the simplest explanation that we have for what break-even point is. And so in SparkTank, we asked a couple of financial questions. This one is, how much does it cost you to produce your product or service? How much can you sell it for? So really we're looking for cost per unit or per sale here, what we've been calling variable cost or ongoing cost. And then looking back at the slide on the cost per sale, right? I think you can even Google these variable examples, but think through everything that you can think in your product or service will require. The second question is asking about how much you can charge for it. So with whatever number you come up with, why did you come up with that number? So we really want to understand why you chose $100, why you chose $10. There should be some reasoning. And if you say, well, it just sounded good, that's okay. But we do want to help understand why that number might need to stay the same, go up or down as we look at margins and profitability of your social enterprise. Then the next question is, how much money do you need to get started? So this sometimes is as much subjective art as it is math. There really is no right answer here because really you can include everything you want or nothing at all. But what we want you to do is think through what your MVP will cost you, what fixed costs you have up front to get started, and how much you need in the bank to potentially pay people if you can't do it all yourself at first. It really is a balance between not wanting to blow a ton of money up front on an idea you haven't fully tested yet, while making sure you don't run out of money right away because you're trying to skimp and cut every corner. So be sure to give us more than one number. You do want to list out all the things that add up to the total amount you think you need to get started. Personally, I'm looking more at your thought process than the final numbers you come up with. And really, I feel like the judges are doing the same. So if you were to receive a SparkTank investment, how would you use it? And this is really, again, money from SparkTank. Like, what are you trying to pay for? Is it licensing? Is it equipment? Is it startup fees? What are those things that you're trying to pay for? And so these are actions you're planning to take with the money you receive. There are some remaining questions, right? We've covered a lot here. These are all optional questions, so you don't have to answer them, but we find them to be interesting that actually help us learn a little bit more about you. But have you started a business before, right? And if yes, how did it go? How did you grow as an entrepreneur? So this is where we're trying to learn more about your entrepreneurial spirit and history. And so what are some of your experience selling things? Another optional question is, do you have any advisors, partners, or people that will be helping that are not on your founding team? Tell us about them and how they will contribute. The next one is, if you've created a legal entity for the social enterprise, what type have you created? And while sole proprietor is not actually one that you have to file for, right? There are things like LLCs and C Corps and S Corps and nonprofits and B Corps and L3Cs, right? There's a lot of options out there for you if you haven't noticed at this point. And so if there are any other information or analysis you would like us to know, please include that here. And so this is like financial analysis or market analysis. And so with all of these questions, you may not know the answer for sure. And you might not be able to get this far in the next few weeks before the applications are due, but use this process to help your social enterprise move forward. And with all of these questions, just write your current theory on what will work. And so with all of this said, I do want to say thank you because I am at the end of our time here. And I did pretty good. And it only took me an hour and a half to get here. But are there any questions from the group today? And feel free to come off mute. Feel free to submit those in the chat. But this is the time for us to ask some questions and answer. And I'd love to answer any questions you have. Let me pull my screen down here.
I have a question. So I was on, I believe, last year, and you did an amazing job last year as well, by the way. Thank you.
I recognize your name. I was telling Jeanette earlier. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Are you still doing one-on-ones after just, you remember I had a very lengthy list of services that I provide, and we did some, I feel like some good work with kind of not necessarily niching down, but just getting more intentional about the population.
Mhm.
And so I'm still in the same situation with some additional supports, though. I really feel like it's getting not so service heavy as it is product. I'm looking at that part of it. So I just wanted to see if you are still offering one-on-ones at some point, and if so, how can we get in touch with you?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So after the workshop is done, I'll be emailing y'all the follow-up resources to the workshop, and also a link to my calendar where you can schedule a one-on-one. Part of what we offer here is that I'm happy to meet with you one-on-one, but I can only do that once before the submission deadline, or else at that point, it really is more of a consulting relationship and helping this process, which actually doesn't fully honor the process. And so I'd be happy if you are going to apply for Spark Tank to meet once between now and then. But at that point, then, I wouldn't be able to consult on your Spark Tank application.
Yes, that sounds good, and that's fair. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And I do encourage you, like, I love chatting with our folks that are submitting, but just know that, on any given year, we'll get like 20 to 30 applications. And so if you do want to chat, I would say, like, let's meet sooner rather than later, because it never fails that my calendar fills up the few days before the submission deadline. Other questions that we may have here? And let me do this, right? Because if there are no questions, I will jump into our final section on how to apply for Spark Tank. Again, here's our timeline. But this timeline itself, again, and remember, I have a typo here, but our deadline to submit is March 9th, and pitch day is actually March 23rd. But I brought up the wrong slide. But we do have what I find to be a pretty simple application process compared to others, but let me see. And you'll receive this email, but our team has put together this Google form here. We want to know your name, business name, phone number, email, and then you'll have sections to upload a video application, and then also to include your written application in here too. What I often tell folks is, when we're doing these Google Forms, is to actually answer these questions in a separate Word doc before you plug them into Google, because you can't actually save your process on a Google form and then just copy and paste into the Google form. That really is the best way to do that here. And then you will actually need to submit a video file. But again, we will email you all these resources and these links. And I do want to take a pause and ask, are there any questions before we close our time together today? All right. Well, I want to thank those that are joining us today and those that are watching at a later time from this recording. I do encourage you, consider Spark Tank. Even if you don't feel like your idea is well teased out, we do have a lot of resources and support. And for those of you guys who are like, hey, like, I'm really excited for Spark Tank, but I need a little bit more hand holding, I will say, for those of you guys who are on this call, if by chance you want to jump into one of our startup courses, we just started one last night on Tuesday evenings from 6 to 8:30. But we do have space for a couple late registrations. And so if by chance you do want to get into a course to help you organize this business, we'd love to have you. Send us an email. We'd love to connect with you. But if anything, thank you, friends, for spending the morning with us this morning, learning about the Spark Tank process. I do look forward to seeing your proposals at a later time. Have a wonderful week, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thank you.